Are we making smart choices for our cities? The smart city movement began when the enabling digital technology allowed a level of communication, which therefore allowed the capability for humans to make their lives better, particularly obviously in the urban environment. But my perception is that the gloss has dimmed over the years, and that's not necessarily because people aren't using the technology. It is more that we're just getting used to it. We take it for granted. However, the technology appears now to be making more tangible progress. So could our cities be getting smarter again? To discuss the issues, I have, as always, my E+T colleagues, Jack Loughran and Tanya Weaver. And the person with the smart city experience is Justin Anderson, who's Managing Director of Data and Digital at the Connected Places Catapult. Now, first of all, could you define what a smart city is? Because I'm sure there's many different definitions and ways of measuring a city's smartness. But how would you, or the Connected Places Catapult, define a smart city?
Well, first of all, I don't really like definitions unless they're really required for semantic purposes to be specific about how you might construct data in a way that is meaningful to others. But typically, smart cities are considered to be urban environments where digital technologies will allow you to use data to make better decisions, whether that's for governance purposes or whether that's to automate different processes. So they have historically been linked to technology, although if you look at the last 25 years, what you'll see are various different movements and interpretations of what it means to live in a smart city.
So when did the concept of a smart city come about, would you say?
Well, I think it's been, actually, if you look back to the 90s and you see the work that Amsterdam was doing with its digital cities, then, arguably that was the beginning of the smart cities. But it wasn't until the 2000s when IBM and Cisco started to market their technologies using smart cities as a banner, a marketing banner for how their technology could make cities smarter, that it really started to become something that people became aware of, or the gloss that you talked about earlier started to shine.
So people generally think, I think the layperson, I think, bus shelters with digital signs on them. What else? What makes a city smart when the layperson is looking at it?
Well, so bus shelters and any kind of street furniture are good assets for being able to connect sensors into the infrastructure. They can allow us to collect data about air quality or number of cycles going past, or when the buses are going to arrive, or pick up data about the weather. So they are good locations for us to put sensors into the city. But in terms of how the data might be used, of course, you get it now from literally every building, every road, every bit of infrastructure that might support the city, from the energy systems to water systems to the telcos that are delivering us with connectivity. So it's everywhere. It's become ubiquitous. It's just built into the fabric of the built environment.
And what would you say over the last 10 years has been major changes in smart city technology that your average pedestrian might not have noticed?
Well, I think first of all, if we think about back 10 years and we just think about the quality of air in London, it's noticeable as I walked across today how much cleaner the air is. And in fact, I think that we have something in the order of twice as good air quality measured by reduction in particulates.
Justin, is that about being a smart city, or is that just because so much of the centre of London has been demotorised?
Well, how did we do that? We put in place ULEZ that was governed and monitored using cameras that were picking up number plates of vehicles and linking that back to DVL registrations of cars and the particulates that they were putting out. So the policy might have come out from mayoral GLA policy to drive this. The technology that supported it was what made it possible. Otherwise, everybody'd be trying it on and just waiting for a fine. This became a situation where people had to comply or they would automatically receive the fine in the post.
Well, I think we'll come back to the enforcement and privacy issues a little bit later.
Is there an argument to be made? And I think critics of smart cities might suggest that perhaps we should be spending money on fixing our water infrastructure, rebuilding Britain's crumbling roads and so on and so forth, rather than investing in a whole load of fancy data collecting sensors that will effectively just tell us what we already know, which is that our infrastructure could be in a better place.
Would I be right in saying that the whole idea of these smarter cities is not just about the signs on bus shelters? The actual water infrastructure is part of it as well. Constantly having the sensors in place to monitor how much water we've got, where it's going, where the drainage is going, and that sort of thing. That is part of being a smart city as well.
Yes, I mean, obviously in China, where there is the potential to build a city in a matter of months or small number of years, they take a very different approach to smart city technologies because they are able to establish them from scratch. In the UK, as you say, we have crumbling Victorian infrastructure that we need to retrofit technologies into to help address some of this systemic challenges that we have that might include leaky pipes or infrastructure that might be unsafe. And so, it's the application of the technologies to the specific context, which is important. And that's why I was saying that the hyper-local innovation around place is key. What you might need in an airport is going to be very different than a new stadium, and how you might manage the traffic through the London Underground is going to be different than how you might manage it through our borders and the interface with border control. So you have to look at each particular challenge in its own light, but also recognize that one of the key things that has happened over the last decade is that we've shifted from individual use cases, a particular problem and a solution that we're trying to solve, to focusing on more systemic issues. And when we think about our crumbling infrastructure, we have to consider this in a systemic way. That our infrastructure is a system of systems. Our water systems will connect to our power systems, will connect to our telco systems. And those interdependencies become part of the fabric of a smart city.
It's maybe one of the things that people don't like about the idea of smart cities is this notion of big tech, or maybe the big telecoms company, because the telecoms companies are at the core of what makes a city smart, really, aren't they?
Connectivity is at the heart of it.
Yeah, and it's the people like Amazon and Google, perhaps, who are in a position to abuse is the wrong word, but certainly take advantage of the commercial opportunities in an infrastructure basis that might be healthy to start with, might not be further down the line.
You're absolutely right. Some of the big technology companies have been in a position to take advantage of the position they have to influence our infrastructure. And, I do think that it is critically important that we maintain sovereignty around this when it comes to the application of digital technologies and for collection and use of data. But it is a delicate balance. In terms of who's making the decisions about that, often the large technology companies will have first mover advantages with their technology and be ahead of legislation, and it takes a while for the law to catch up and understand what it really means. And that itself isn't a bad thing, because you want to encourage innovation. You don't want legislation to prevent us from improving the experiences around us. We just have to make sure that while we start to deploy these technologies, we still have the potential to intervene as we need to. And get that balance right.
I mean, what do you think about the other side of that? Because that's like large American tech firms coming over and potentially using a smart city revolution for their own commercial gain, whether that's to actually the benefit of citizens or not. I feel like the other side of that would be, say, Chinese firms installing sensors and so forth in key locations that could potentially represent a national security risk, which is something that you've actually seen in the last few years with the removal of any Huawei manufactured technologies in UK telecoms networks over those concerns.
And just to add on, as I was reading Amazon, I think it's called Sidewalker, the scheme that they've got running in America. It's not over in the UK, but that is enabling the smart city by picking up sensor, just a Bluetooth level. So when somebody is on the sidewalk, they can pick up the readings from a sensor and communicate it centrally, which is crowdsourcing the whole communications and sensor data gathering, which makes sense when it's benign, but people have to opt out of that scheme, and most of them wouldn't know that they were in it. And it's fine at the moment, but as Jack says, if that was the case with Chinese technology, we might not feel so comfortable.
So I think one of the key issues here is personal data and how we may allow technology companies to use that. And of course, we need to comply with GDPR, and the Information Commissioner's Office is responsible for overseeing that and ensuring that the UK, is able to manage its data in accordance with that. Right now, the EU appears to be watering down some of the provisions in GDPR, but the new legislation that our government is bringing out is maintaining the existing provisions. And I suspect that means we will be, gold-plated GDPR in the future. So, this country is very sensitive to those issues. In terms of whether or not it's a good thing to be able to pick up data about where people are, again, it's context dependent. If we've just had a flood and we might be able to identify where vulnerable people might be in order to deploy emergency resources in the right sorts of areas, then that kind of data can be very useful. If, however, it's being used to track us and monitor how we move around the country in what could be perceived as a big brother surveillance state, then that's not something that I think as citizens any of us want, especially when you look at how other countries that have really used these technologies in a way that has been perhaps to move away from an inclusive society into one where these technologies can be weaponized. That is a danger and a risk that we need to be aware of. But the benefits of using these technologies in order to make our life easier and make citizens' lives easier and to take that friction out, is the other side of it. And that's what we've got to get right.
I mean, as you're probably aware, a few weeks ago, Spain had a blackout that impacted the entire country, and Portugal and even bits of France, I think. And the cause of that was quite unclear at the time, but there was some speculation that it could have been like a cyber attack on key bits of the energy infrastructure there. I think in the end, it turned out it was thought to be a fire at a substation or something like that. So a bit less nefarious than initial speculations may have led you to believe. But I mean, are there actually risks with smart cities that are actually giving too much, we're ceding too much control over to technologies that actually present another like vector for an attack of some form from either a hostile state or a rogue group?
Yes, and I think especially when we're thinking about infrastructure and the ability to target vulnerabilities in the country, if the information about infrastructure is more readily available, then, as you say, that creates new risk vectors. And for that reason, I think that whilst there is a general move towards providing data in an open way, there will always be a need for operators to be able to act together in concert in smaller groups to share important information about our critical national infrastructure. So we have this balance between getting the benefit of, for example, opening up information about where the buses and trains might be so that we can more efficiently plan our routes versus how we might deal with a substation and a fire in a substation, as we recently saw, causing a Heathrow to shut down a runway. And the key to this, though, is not to just say, okay, let's share all our data with all other organizations. It's to ensure that we have the right rules in place around how we might share data. And if we just go back to COVID and recognize at the time how data was used there to help us avert what could have potentially been situations that were worse than they were. We have Sainsbury's delivering food parcels and other retailers to vulnerable citizens because they were able to access data about vulnerable citizens that was approved by the ICO on the basis that in this particular instance, it was considered that sharing that information would be beneficial to citizens. But, as soon as it was over, that data was no longer shared in that way. So I would suggest that what we will do is get smarter at setting up the rules under which we will open data up to ensure resilience. If there is a substation that's gone down, who needs to know? What impact is it going to have on the surrounding area, on hospitals, on how we might manage our emergency response, how we might look after vulnerable citizens, how we might ensure that business continues and take decisions based upon a balance of different factors.
If you're talking about UK cities, I don't think there's any, including London, I don't think there's any UK city would hold the crown as the kind of smart city capital of the world. And I think from what I've researched, it would be places like Singapore, Dubai, or a number of Chinese cities. Are there any lessons that possibly we could learn from the UK, from these cities that deploy smart city technology more broadly, that possibly technologies that we should be adopting more in the UK?
Can I just frame that in a slightly different way? Because we, in this our March-April issue where we covered smart cities, we did do a chart of the world's top 20 smart cities, and that was determined by the Institute of Management Development, and is based largely on the response of citizens as to how happy they are with the smartness of their cities, if you want to put it that way. London was number 8 actually, and was the only British city in our top echelons. There was the 4 Scandinavian capitals were in there. There was a couple in Switzerland, a couple in United Arab Emirates, 3 or 4 in China, I think, in the top 20. There was clusters basically, and as Jack says, Britain isn't a cluster, and London is a bit of an outlier. What makes these regions particularly strong? And as Jack says, what could we in the UK learn from these other regions?
Well, you mentioned a number of European countries, and there's as clusters potentially. They have over the last decade been recipients of large amounts of innovation investment from Horizon funding from the EU that we've been missing out for some time. We are now back in Horizon, and I'm working with a UK city to be able to work with European cities to support that funding.
But we didn't drop out of Horizon at the stage when Oslo and Stockholm were smartening themselves up, if you like. That was only when we left, when Brexit occurred, that we dropped out of Horizon, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes, I mean it's been a journey that's been going on for some time, but of course a blip in that journey and lack of funding that is going into the right type of research and innovation creates some uncertainty about the investment from private sector and that rollout that we've seen across Scandinavia. And I'd also like to pick up on Estonia and the work that they've done as a country that made it mandatory to have digital identification, and other countries in Scandinavia left that as something that was voluntary. But as a result of that, they were able to drive some great efficiencies across their public services that we've not seen certainly in the UK. This new act that is coming into force will move towards digital identification, meaning that we will have our passports and driving licenses available on mobile phones.
Can I just throw in a stat that I read earlier, which I thought was I found quite astounding, really, that cities occupy about 2 to 3% of Earth's land area, but are responsible for about 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. And now we haven't said it, out loud, but of course, a lot of smart cities, it has to be about carbon emissions and, reducing carbon. I know there's a lot of electrification. You're talking about Oslo and the buses, or is that something that's going to be worked on, like a lot of the drive towards?
Yes, so obviously cities occupy a small percentage of land mass, but increasingly a large percentage of human population drawn towards cities. And estimates suggest that by 2050 we'll have in the order of 10 billion people in cities. Now that's more people than we have on the planet today. But the growth of populations across the world, and certainly in India and China, is moving us towards ever increasing focus on cities as a place that provides people with a safe place to live, get employment, drive innovation, and there's efficiencies living together in that kind of way, rather than living in the country and having to have a broadband line laid out that is going to require the roads being dug up, unless of course you're using satellite links or something else. So I think that the pollutant issues, whether that's waste or emissions of cities, is of course therefore going to be higher. But it also allows us to focus on reducing that through, as you mentioned, electrification, which will be a key one for transport systems and for heating. And so, if we can focus our innovation in ways that will address the challenges that we face with emissions and waste, then that's got to be a good thing and a good use of digital and data to be able to address that.
But I think, as you're saying, London's got Victorian technologies. We've got a tube system that's old. And then Jack was mentioning Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, that have this fantastic new metro system that's super efficient and super green. But of course, we can't just install that in London with old technology. So
no, the process of electrification is one that is moving at speed, and it is recognised that electrification will be absolutely critical for us to achieve our net zero targets. It's not the only form of the only part of the transition of the grid that's going to be important. Storing electricity is difficult, and so balancing the grid between supply and demand is difficult. And if we are also not only electrifying but starting to use an increasing amount of renewable energy, we need to find ways of storing that as well. And that might or might not be stored inside the city, but we see hydrogen as being an important part of the equation there as well.
Just on that energy efficiency side of things, a lot of these systems will depend on artificial intelligence to work, basically. Those efficiencies, and people have been talking more and more about the energy penalty that comes with AI these days. And I know there's a big difference between when you're training models and when you're actually using the models. It's not always the same thing, but nonetheless, it is a consideration, and it could be an energy cost that you are shifting outside of the city, but it still exists.
That's absolutely right. And of course, the AI is being trained in data centers in the UK. Ireland has been our data center, and today more electricity is used in data centers in Ireland than by citizens and businesses, other than data centers. So that's the beginning of a curve that just continues to accelerate. And as we deploy AI models within these data centers, they will consume more energy. The government has put out a consultation to identify places in the UK that have got sufficient power and water to be able to support the data centers. But we're still way behind the curve. You mentioned UAE earlier on. I mean, there's a lot of investment that is being made there into data centers. Just this week, UAE announced that it's going to provide every citizen with a free version of the premium version of ChatGPT. on the state in order to drive up the adoption of AI by consumers to the best models they can, which is a huge move. And there have been announcements of some very large-scale data centers in the Middle East that will be of the order of, at least 500 gigawatts of power, which is an enormous amount of power to power a data center. Because, of course, there's recognition that being an advanced country in AI will provide a competitive advantage on the world stage in many different ways.
I think being comfortable with the technology also leads on to security, because I have my in-laws who don't do internet banking for that reason. They're like, who's looking at my data, And I think that's the big security piece in the whole smart cities is who's watching me.
It's a fear. It is a fear until we get used to it, until we realize that, in fact, there's cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
Just looking around to see if there's one in this room, but
There is. We're not using it, but there is one.
There is one. I mean, everywhere, and we just start to get comfortable with it, and assume and hope that it's being governed in the appropriate way.
Well, there is that issue of if we're relying on AI to pick up on facial recognition and so on, we get the algorithm bias involved in that as well. There's a long way to go before we really are happy with privacy within our cities, isn't there?
Bias is a big issue, and it has been one that technologists have been working hard to address. It's been surfaced as something that is a critical part of governing ethical AI, and we are getting better at it. And you probably, if you take photographs on your phone, will have seen that some of the capabilities of sorting your photographs or finding, different people out of the album that you've built up over the course of time is getting better and better on the day. So we are now pretty good on biometrics and have got to the stage where we've reduced most of the bias from biometrics. And that's only getting better by the day. And it's worth recognizing that since the start of the smart city movement, technology has increased in its power by over 1,000 times. If you just use Moore's law to sort of trace back where we were, we've seen this exponential capability in technology. But the next 20 years and the next 1,000 times faster than we've seen are going to really change things in a massive way. We're not very good in thinking exponentially. We're much better at thinking about, what happened yesterday, last week, last month, last year, and not seeing that continual rise. But things are happening at speed and pace right now. And I remain a great optimist for what we're going to do with it in this country.
Okay, well, that's all been fascinating. Thank you, Justin. Just a final quick word. Again, this is going to make it sound like a chat show here, but you're, as well as being managing director of the Catapult, you also find time to be a best-selling author. Is that right?
I'd love to say I was a best-selling author. I have published a book called Innovation Nation, A Vision for Britain in 2050. Looking at the next 25 years, 2050, of course, is the year we need to be net zero as a country. And there's a lot of work that has to be done between now and then. What I've done is look at the foundations that we need to have in place and the architecture that we need to build in order to create future infrastructure.
So if we read your book, then we'll have the answer to Jack's last question then.
The last section starts to unpick how the nexus of forces of these technologies will actually be delivered and what sort of a future we might actually move towards. What I do stress, though, is this is not intended to be a prediction or a forecast. It's rather I'm looking at the direction of travel of different technologies and how they might come together with the right policies to deliver what will be a better world and better connected places. There is an alternative world, which is perhaps more dystopian, but my view is that the more we think about the potential of these technologies to create better connected places, the more likely that our children and grandchildren will inherit a world that is a good world.
Fingers crossed.
Plenty to think about, good and bad. All right, Justin, thank you very much for your time. I take if anybody wants to get in touch with you, they can do through the Catapult website.
Catapult website or LinkedIn, probably the two best ways.
Great. And in the meantime, thank you, Tanya, Jack as well, of course. And you can pick up all the rest of the Off the Page podcasts and the usual place on the website, YouTube, and so on. But for today, goodbye.